Point, the biggest and most expensive nuclear power station ever built, is to go ahead. Good evening. It's costly, controversial, and for 30 years will generate the highest electricity bills consumers have ever faced. But short of power generation, irrespective of cost, and so far unproven technology, the government believes Hinkley Point will cleanly produce 7% of the power that the country desperately needs. The decision has reportedly been made in Paris tonight by the board of EDF, the company charged with building it. Tonight, the latest, and we debate, should it really go ahead?
Also tonight, trapped under siege and under fire. The United Nations warns the clock is ticking for the people of the Syrian city of Aleppo. Surrounded by government forces, they face a growing humanitarian crisis. The Russians offer a safe corridor out, but can they be taken at their word? Standing room only, the commuter belt squeeze. Rail passenger numbers soar as ticket prices rise too. Why can't the rail companies cope with their own customers? And the fast food company Byron Burgers accused of pulling a fast one on staff. They were called to a health and safety briefing only to be met by immigration officials. 35 people from several countries were arrested and some have already been deported.
In Philadelphia, the brightest stars at the Democratic Convention align to unleash a ferocious attack on Donald Trump. But with American voters seemingly convulsed in anger at politics as usual, has the Democratic leadership found the right message to propel Hillary Clinton to the White House?
There has never been a man or a woman, not me, not Bill, nobody, more qualified than Hillary Clinton to serve as President of the United States of America.
If reports out of Paris tonight are correct, then Britain will tomorrow sign a contract with EDF which it cannot afford to break. In order to keep the lights on, the UK will be committed to the highest electricity prices in its history. But ministers are so desperate to keep the electricity flowing that, for all the doubts about its technology, Hinkley Point must be built. Similar plants being built in Finland and France are years behind in completion and are billions of pounds over budget. The fallout of EDF's decision to accept the Hinkley contract has started already. One EDF board member quitting today, saying the project was too risky. Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has the latest.
Things are not always as they seem. A first world nation with the lights teetering on blackout. Britain's energy crunch, the result of wasted years and acute policy failures. And here's what French power giant EDF thinks is the answer. A so-called state-of-the-art nuclear reactor in the heart of Somerset, designed to deliver 35 years of British power. The question is, will it rescue Britain's needs or condemn generations to overpriced energy?
And you have to strike the best deal you can at that point in time. You can always look back 20 years later and say, well, by 20 years' standards, this is expensive or not. The important thing that we need is capacity, and we need base load capacity. And nuclear at the moment has been for many years now the preferred government option for creating that capacity. Hinkley is the only game in town.
The Somerset project was dreamed up almost 10 years ago after Tony Blair called for private companies to fund a nuclear project. When EDF came on board, it said it would be ready for Britons to cook their Christmas turkeys with by next year. But that proved to be way off the mark. The years that followed were beset with delays, wrangling by the French for more subsidies, and even a nuclear catastrophe in Japan. By the time the Chinese were there, David Cameron was backed into a corner on the type of deal he could sign. Amazingly, though, the project has limped through, and tonight, as soon as the EDF board decision becomes final, the UK will be past the point of no return. At the moment, the wholesale price of energy is £46, but for Hinkley would have to pay £92.50. That's more than double. And it means over its lifetime, Hinkley's cost for the consumer has jumped from £6.1 billion to £37 billion, a six-fold increase, and the building work has not even begun.
It will be the most expensive power station in the world. It's difficult to say that it's going to be a good deal for the UK consumer. At the moment, it looks like a very expensive way of delivering what the government wants us to deliver, which is reliable electricity at zero carbon.
High-level radioactive waste.
It's pretty clear the Hinkley project has ignited controversy, whether with anti-nuclear protest groups, environmentalists or consumer watchdogs. What the government hopes is that the energy stability it brings, as well as the jobs, will outweigh the current doubts.
Helia Ebrahimi is with me now, and we're joined from Hinkley Point by our correspondent Andy Davis. Andy, window dressing down there for today's announcement, or is something already going on?
Well, there's a little bit going on. I think you'll see more tomorrow morning. People here have been waiting a very long time for this moment, so a certain amount of relief among the few employees who are left here this evening, a relief that it appears to have been given the green light, but apprehension that they haven't yet got the final confirmation. What's likely to happen next? Well, that's Hinkley Point B over there, the existing power station. Hinkley Point A, that's the one that's being decommissioned, and by them, on this vast expanse of ground here, looks like they are now going to be starting to build Hinkley Point C. They've been levelling the ground here for some time now. But what they get now with this decision, if it comes through, is consent to actually start building. And what that means is that the workforce here, currently about 600 to 700, would at some point become 5,500. It would mean that instead of shifting earth around here, they would actually be bringing in 3 million tonnes of concrete just to lay the foundations. So that gives you an idea of just how big an operation this would be.
So what's the reaction there?
Well, there's a local Chamber of Commerce person here who said that this is actually really a pivotal moment, a deep economic stimulant for the local area. But of course, not everyone's happy. People in Bridgewater today, there were some people saying it's unsafe, they're using the wrong type of energy and it's overpriced. It's always been controversial, and that's not going to stop.
Thanks very much. Well, now, Helia, we had a resignation earlier in the year from the finance director of EDF. They've been struggling to come to a decision. Today, another board member resigned, but there does seem now to have been a decision. What's been going on?
Listen, it's extraordinary. I can't think of another project that's been beset with so many different issues. And you talked about the resignation. Of course, we had the finance director earlier this year resigning because of Hinkley and giving a very stinging testimony to the French government about why EDF couldn't afford it. And this is a company that has had huge problems. You know, it's been raided by French authorities. Its French partner, Areva, who designs nuclear plants and the components, has had to admit that for decades it falsified safety records. You know, and first and foremost, you've got to think the other two reactors that are like Hinkley haven't actually been delivered in Finland and in France. So real big questions.
And so, I mean, what actually is the British government doing? Why are they so desperate to sign this?
Look, we are very much at the end of the line with our energy ability. We don't have stable energy. Over the winter this year, we were really at rock bottom rates. For 10 years, the government has been struggling to decide what it's going to do in terms of, does it replace the coal power station? Does it bring renewables on board? And how does it push through the nuclear power stations? I think from people I've spoken to within government, there is a real, I guess, depression about the Hinkley project because nobody thinks it's that brilliant. But in a post-Brexit environment, I think there's a lot of nerves about coming out of that deal and ending it. This deal has a symbolic meaning because it means Britain is open for business.
Helia Ebrahimi. Well, now, with us in the studio, Kate Blagojevich from Greenpeace, and we're joined from Hinkley Point by the local MP, Conservative Ian Littlegranger. Ian Littlegranger, obviously, you're delighted because you've been very much with this project all along. But there are the most appalling problems besieging it. I mean, the fact that Finland and France trying to build the same thing are billions of pounds overspent and terribly behind.
Well, I think that's easier to say about Finland and France. Let's wait and see what HPC does, Hinkley Point C. This has been 9.5 years in the planning, and the union guys are here on site, the next door crew. We're ready to go. We'll show people what we can do. We spent a lot of time getting this right to the stage now that we feel, and France feels, they can go ahead with this. You watch us.
Well, surely you're anglicising something which is extremely French. I mean, 25,000 jobs, 5,000 go to you, 20,000 go to the French. If the French don't pull their weight, you're bust.
I know they'll pull their weight all right, I can promise you that. Vincent de Rivers and his entire team have made that clear. The unions have made that clear. We've made that clear. We'll show them what we're like, and we'll show them what we're about. I've got no doubts we're going to deliver. And behind me, you can see the site, £2.5 billion already spent. Workforce of nearly 1,000 on site. We're doing what we said we're doing.
Unstoppable momentum, Kate Blagojevich. It's going to happen.
I think time will tell. I mean, certainly in Finland, in France, and in fact in China too, all of the similar reactors that they're trying to build are not being built. They can't be built at the moment. They're in terrible trouble. The French nuclear regulator is not happy at all about the situation in Flamanville, where they're trying desperately to finish the build of the very similar reactor to what's coming to Hinkley. There isn't a scrap of evidence that shows that actually this reactor can be built. The fact that the government believes that it can be built in Somerset is wishful thinking and nothing more than that.
Well, Ian Littlegranger, let's get this scrap of evidence. What evidence is there that this plant can be built? There's never been one built yet, and there are these three that are in production. What convinces you so strongly that it can be built and will be built?
Well, I spent 9.5 years on this. I started under Tony Blair. The Secretary of State was Ed Miliband. We've gone through the due diligence. We've worked absolutely flat out, and it's taken that time to make sure everything that we can do to make sure this is a success is being done. And so far, everything they said they would do, they've done it. We're actually standing on the site at the moment. You can see behind me, they're not hanging around. We've actually made sure that we're up on speed, we're doing what we say we're doing, we're delivering. That's the evidence. I'm standing on it.
This is actually a brutal failure for Greenpeace, isn't it? Because the fact is, you've not managed to come up with an alternative for saving the British energy production scene. It's desperately short of energy, and surely there is nothing that could quickly be built that could produce the 7% that's going to be built down there in Hinkley Point.
No, I disagree. I think that the government can meet its decarbonisation targets in the UK. It just has to want to. And at the moment, it doesn't want to. It wants to go for new nuclear and it wants to go for gas. And that is why it's been slashing the subsidies for renewable power, so that investment has pulled out. We've seen this week that 12,000 jobs have been lost in the solar industry just in the last year because of the government's incoherent policies. And so investors have been pulling out. And we should be embracing the new technology, the innovation that is happening elsewhere in the world with both hands. And instead, this government is locking us in to an old-fashioned and broken technology that isn't working.
Ian Littlegranger, young as you are, you will have long gone when this thing is producing the most expensive electricity this country has ever produced. What are you going to say from your retirement seat to your constituents when they discover they are paying these massive sums for their electricity bills?
I'm going to be here in 10 years' time, I can promise you that, and you can take that as read. I've just been listening to the lady. I don't know which planet she's on. She's not a planet I recognise. I'll tell you this. We've made sure that we've got what we have to do to keep the lights on. That's what this is about, and we will keep the lights on. We're still doing gas. We're doing other technology just behind us. We're looking at a tidal lagoon. I'm sure she's happy about that, but this is all not going to be done in isolation. And I'm going to square off my constituents, because they've been part of this scheme. We've had nuclear here since 1958. Don't scare us. We know what we're doing with it. And I can assure you, they know what they're paying for, and they know why we're paying for it. But we want energy security. Yeah, we're in a new world.
With respect, I mean, the previous plant was not producing electricity at the vast price that is going to be charged for this electricity for 30 years. 30 years when every other energy source in this country is going down in price.
Well, this will be producing for 60 years. We get this back in 30 years, so we're buying it on a mortgage. You're quite right in that. And actually, if you aggregate it over that 60 years, and that's with today's technology, given the B station, which is the one on the far side over my left shoulder, that is already on a life extension. This plant will go on probably for 100 years with the technology in 60 years' time. That'll be a price worth paying.
Kate Blagojevich, would you be able to produce this quantity of electricity cheaper than they are?
Well, we've already seen that Dong Energy this week has said that they're producing offshore wind power for the Netherlands at cheaper rates than Hinkley. This is a terrible deal for the British consumer and taxpayers who are going to be paying for this. School leavers today are going to be paying for this until they retire. This is an absolutely ridiculous situation to be in for a technology that is old-fashioned, broken, when we could be breaking new boundaries with new technologies that are working and are going down in price.
Kate Blagojevich, Ian Littlegranger, thank you both very warmly for joining us. Jackie.
The United Nations has warned that the clock is ticking towards a humanitarian crisis in the besieged Syrian city of Aleppo. Around 300,000 people are trapped after troops loyal to President Assad seized and closed down the last remaining supply route into the city. There are now serious concerns over dwindling medical facilities and food shortages with daily bombardments. The UN has called tonight for immediate humanitarian access to those trapped. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman has this report and a warning: it contains distressing images from the start.
Through the clouds of dust from another airstrike, this much is clear. The city of Aleppo is under a bombardment of unimaginable violence. The attacks are daily, though this one was filmed last week. People here say barrel bombs were dropped from Syrian helicopters, and that may well be true, given how expert the survivors have become in the military tactics used to wipe them out. Then the bulldozers move in, though not to clear the rubble. Instead, they are sifting through it, because that's the only way to find the dead, lying beneath the concrete. A cupboard of clothes neatly lined up is teetering on the edge of the bomb site, along with those who managed to live here. Some 300,000 people still in rebel-held areas, almost completely surrounded now, and on the brink of what the UN this week called a medieval and shameful siege.
Despite the siege of Aleppo, the warplanes and helicopters never left the skies. This is Al Mashhad district. It was hit by 2 barrel bombs, which killed 20 people. We recovered 6 bodies, and we're looking for another 8.
The Syrian army is now using drones to film its advance here, as well as the destruction below. Aleppo, or what is left of it, is potentially the biggest prize in 5 years of civil war. My soul, my blood, I give myself for Syria, the soldiers shout. The army released these pictures today, showing newly captured areas in the north of the city. Despite the celebrations, aid agencies say those trapped inside face possible starvation, with food supplies due to run out in 2 to 3 weeks' time.
The city is de facto besieged because it is almost militarily completely encircled. The clock is therefore ticking. There is no doubt about that.
Most of Aleppo is surrounded by Syrian government forces, with Shia militiamen from Lebanon, Iraq and Iran. The most recent bombardment, aided by the Russians, has been concentrated in the north. In the last few days, the Balaramoun roundabout there and the Castello Ring Road have been captured. This cuts off the last supply road out to the Turkish border, leaving rebel forces even more confined in the east of the city. These are army pictures of the Balaramoun roundabout, and today it's advanced beyond it into the suburbs. Any chance of a ceasefire here depends on the Russians talking to the Americans in Geneva, but how fast will the Russians move when victory appears near? The Syrian government has dropped these leaflets on the city, calling on civilians to cross into government-controlled areas, telling them to hold the leaflet above their heads, presumably to avoid being shot. Russia's defense minister today talked of a large-scale humanitarian operation, with 3 safe corridors out and rebels offered the chance to surrender. But without the UN guaranteeing their safety, How many of these battle-hardened people will leave now, having stayed on the rebel side so long? Yet the alternative of staying is no alternative. At the weekend, 4 hospitals were bombed from the air. While these babies in incubators survived, the nurses say that one did not. Last week, this man was filmed in eastern Aleppo, crying over the body of his wife in the back of a truck and asking for his dead son to be brought to him. The suffering of Aleppo, then, filmed by those who live it every appalling day.
And Jonathan Rugman joins me now. Jonathan, Aleppo has seen so many terrible moments over the last few years. How is this different? Is this different?
Well, it could spell the beginning of the end of the Syrian revolution as we knew it 5 years ago, because Aleppo is Syria's biggest city. If it falls, maybe the revolution will fail as well. And aside from the humanitarian crisis unfolding there, what you could end up with in Syria is a division between the Assad government and the far more extreme Islamist groups such as Islamic State, which of course is what the Syrians and the Russians want.
Now, just before we came on air, the UN issued a new statement. What did it say?
They are extremely worried about this humanitarian crisis. They welcome the fact that the Russians today are talking about humanitarian corridors, but they say they've got to be free humanitarian corridors and that people must not be coerced to leave. And of course, if the UN are not involved in these humanitarian corridors, as they are not and as they are proposed, then what guarantee do the people who are trapped have when they come out, let alone the rebels themselves?
And one of the rebel groups operating in Aleppo is Jabhat al-Nusra, traditionally allied to al-Qaeda. This evening, their leader made a very rare statement. What did that say?
Well, the leader said that they were leaving al-Qaeda, and he made it very clear why. He made no bones about it. He said it was because they were trying to avoid airstrikes by the Americans and the Russians, because the Americans and the Russians are talking about getting together to combat Jabhat al-Nusra. So they are changing their name. They're calling themselves the Levant Conquering Front. And although it might on the surface appear a good thing for a group to split itself from what we used to know as al-Qaeda, the problem for the Americans is that the Nusra fighters could embed themselves with the groups that the Americans support. And therefore, you then have a much wider Islamist front, which the Americans have far less influence over and which they cannot support through Congress because of the involvement of people they regard as terrorists.
Jonathan, thank you very much. John.
Some breaking news. Hinkley Point has just been officially approved by the EDF board, the first new nuclear build in the United Kingdom in a generation. Well, now to Philadelphia, where Hillary Clinton will take the stage later for the final night of the Democratic Convention, formally accepting her historic nomination for president. But last night it was Barack Obama who stole the show, reflecting on his 8 years in office and praising his former Secretary of State as the most qualified person ever to run for the White House. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is at the convention in Philadelphia. Kylie.
This was a barnstorming speech by Barack Obama. John, I mean, he doesn't give bad convention, but this one really electrified the arena. His message, he seems to be almost personally offended by the dystopian vision that Donald Trump has articulated, and he wanted to wrest that back. He talked repeatedly of American values, what he thought they were: optimism, courage. And on the floor, it went down very well. I was standing next to a young Hispanic woman who was thrilled when the vice presidential nominee, Tim Kaine, started speaking in Spanish. And there was an African-American congresswoman who obviously had a very strong sense that this was a bittersweet moment, farewelling Barack Obama and welcoming Hillary Clinton. But he did his job. He handed the baton to Hillary Clinton with a great deal of gusto. She was met with a really rapturous response when she made a surprise appearance at the end of the night.
Please welcome the 44th President of the United States of America.
He walked out to a forest of blue. Delegates held his name aloft, thrilled by the arrival of the man who made history with his election to the White House 8 years ago. This was not only a baton change moment, but an attempt to reset the national psyche, to turn away from fear and embrace a diverse, optimistic America.
Sure, we have real anxieties about paying the bills and protecting our kids. We are shocked and saddened by the madness of Orlando or Nice. But as I've traveled this country, What I have also seen more than anything is what is right with America. Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, young, old, gay, straight, folks with disabilities, all pledging allegiance under the same proud flag to this big, bold country that we love. That's what I see. That's the America I know.
This is full force Barack Obama reclaiming a more positive vision of America, pushing back against Donald Trump and making the case that Hillary Clinton is his natural successor in the White House. But Donald Trump stands in her way.
He's trying to tell us he cares about the middle class. Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
Vice President Joe Biden began a cavalcade of mockery that passed from speaker to speaker.
I'm a New Yorker, and I know a con when I see one.
We're going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it, believe me. We're going to destroy ISIS so fast, believe me. There's nothing suspicious in my tax returns, believe me.
As for the president, he delivered his most powerful criticism with a velvet glove. Without mentioning Trump's name, he labeled the Republican nominee as great a threat to American values as ISIS.
That's why anyone who threatens our values, whether fascists or communists or jihadists or homegrown demagogues, will always fail in the end.
The America he describes is very different to the America that we've been hearing about from Donald Trump, for example.
It's basically assuming that all Americans are hating of their neighbors, all Americans are scared, all Americans don't want to see us move forward, they want to go back, and that's not true.
Back on stage, making the case for Hillary Clinton, the president ran through her CV, emphasizing her experience as his Secretary of State.
I can say with confidence, there has never been a man or a woman, not me, not Bill, nobody, more qualified than Hillary Clinton to serve as President of the United States of America.
She is politically to his right, but as the president closed out in a big Hollywood moment, the nominee herself appeared stage left. The excitement on the floor matched on stage. Hillary Clinton herself thrilled to stand alongside the most popular Democratic figure in the country.
8 years ago, we all cried. When he took that position, he changed all of our lives. As a black person, that was history. As a mother today, this is double history. Super history.
But history is not made yet, and this, more than any other recent election, feels like a race that can't be won with optimism alone. I'm joined now by Mark McKinnon. He's one of America's leading election strategists who worked on the George W. Bush campaign, but has now brilliantly crossed over into TV.
So it's kind of a high noon, OK Corral aspect to all this.
Cat.
Hello, Captain.
Yeah, Cat, look at it.
How are you?
You're looking great.
Good to see you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So I'm painting this morning.
He's currently the host of The Circus, a weekly TV show which looks behind the scenes at this extraordinary election campaign. Mark, thanks for joining us. Let's think about last night, reflect on this very sunny, optimistic speech by Barack Obama. Is there a danger that he turns off the people who are expressing very clearly anxieties and fears and fueling the Trump campaign?
Sure, it's a strategic gamble, but campaigns are always about one or the other. They're about hope or they're about fear. Trump is hoping that people are really afraid. They want a strong, sort of strongman response to domestic violence and international threats. Obama and Clinton are making the bet that the voters are looking for an optimistic vision of the future. I mean, our campaign in 2000 for Bush was all about the future and all about hope. The campaign in 2004 was all about fear. So really, I mean, nobody's quite sure where this election is right now, although we know that it is a circus out there.
I mean, no one seems to have a real sense of how to put a hole in Trump's side at the moment, in the sense that there is talk of him being unreliable, there's the character, but it's not really dealing with the underwhelming anxiety, it's not really dealing with those fears.
Well, the fundamental thing about Donald Trump is that he is tapping into voters who feel disenfranchised, who feel anxious, who feel like they've left part out. I mean, his whole dialogue about the system is rigged. There's so many people out there that feel that, and they feel that Donald Trump is their voice for that. So,
I mean, we saw a lot of mockery on stage last night. I mean, Joe Biden does good mockery, but, you know, they seem to just want to ridicule him almost. Is that going to work?
I'm not sure. I think the best strategic framing I've seen for this was one of the Clinton senior advisors we talked to who said, what we should really do is diminish the man but enhance the threat. So in other words, you know, it's okay to sort of, you know, suggest that on a personal level he's quirky and odd, but make sure that people understand that as a leader there's a real threat.
Let's listen to some of the quirkiness and oddness. This is Donald Trump speaking yesterday about Russia. Let's have a listen.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
So the Democratic response to that was outrage, treachery. Now he's now saying, look, I was just being sarcastic.
Well, that's what he always does when as soon as he sort of feels like maybe he pushed the line a little bit too far. But his instinct is to communicate a message of power and strength. And the whole thing about Putin is all about power and strength. I'm strong, he's strong, that's why we get along.
Yeah, we've got that in common.
Yeah, we've got that in common, and people, you know, that's what he recognizes, my power and strength, and that's why it's a big deal, and that's why voters should respond, because they know I'm going to be as strong as Putin.
I'm not going to ask you who's going to win the election, but maybe after the first debate we can talk again.
Glad to. Let's hook it up again.
Okay, all right. Cheers. Mark McKinnon, thank you very much. That's all from Philadelphia, but now it's back to you in London.
Kylie Morris in Philadelphia.
Are you feeling the crush during rush hour? Rail passenger numbers have doubled compared to 20 years ago. Some trains are so full that passengers are standing in the toilets. Services in Birmingham, Cardiff and Manchester have all seen a rise in passengers forced to stand, while in London, 155,000 people go without a seat each morning. We sent Kieran Jenkins to stand with them.
Please do not attempt to board or alight from the train when the doors are closing.
It's just gone 8 a.m. and we're heading into London Paddington. On the 5th most crowded route in the country, this is what counts as a good day.
And if you're under the impression that your train ticket was actually entitled you to a seat, then a lot of British commuter services, you're going to be sadly disappointed. The reality is quite a congested, quite an intimate journey to work.
Across the country, new figures show overcrowding is getting worse. Trains are busier than ever and more expensive too. Are you familiar with the old elbow in the face from the person next to you?
No, not so much the elbows that bother me, it's more the armpits that are the more odious kind of offender.
I don't mind standing, but I prefer to stand comfortably rather than being squished down the aisle with basically putting my bottom into somebody's face.
And you get a lovely little seat to rest your bottom on?
I managed to have a seat, yep.
Is that usual?
It is, yes.
Okay, problems with overcrowding, is this a myth or what?
Well, I came up first class, so it wasn't a problem there. But,
okay, so that's the secret. Spare a thought, though, for passengers on the two worst services. Glasgow into Manchester at 8:22, a service for 191 people carrying 410 passengers. And the train of shame from Brighton into London at 8:20, with a space for 410 people, but it's stuffed with 960 commuters. This man is from the organisation that's supposed to get customers a good deal. We had a simple question. Where is the value for money in standing on an overcrowded carriage every single morning?
I understand when passengers are frustrated when they can't get a seat.
Is it value for money?
I understand. Let me get on to that point, because that's a really important point. I understand the frustration of passengers who can't get a seat and buy a season ticket.
Is it value for money?
I appreciate that people want to get a seat, and that's what they expect, but we aren't going to be able to do that on every train at the peak. That's why we're investing billions.
You don't seem to want to be able to say if it's value for money or not.
I think services are a very good way to get into work.
Are they value for money?
I think trains are value for money, yeah.
Right, even if you're standing?
Yeah. No, hold on, let's start again. I think they are value for money. I think it's frustrating if you can't get a seat, yes.
Southern failed! Southern failed!
For true passenger frustration, see Southern Rail. An ongoing industrial dispute forced the resignation of the rail minister this month, and the RMT union has just announced another strike. The government says it's investing billions and delivering thousands of extra carriages by 2019. In the meantime, be prepared to stand.
Please have your ticket ready for inspection.
Now, it's more than 2 years since the beginning of the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. The outbreak started in Guinea, quickly spreading to Liberia and Sierra Leone, taking more than 11,000 lives. Almost 4,000 victims of the disease were from Sierra Leone, where the outbreak was finally declared over in March of this year. But the impact of the crisis goes beyond even the huge death toll. The whole country was shut down for the duration of the outbreak, causing the economy to shrink by over 20%. We have two films from Sierra Leone. The first is from the small market town of Koindu, where Ebola first reached the country. Inigo Gilmore has this report.
Before the Ebola, people that used to come Guinea, Liberia, like we say 2,500 people.
Koindu is a market town at the crossroads of Sierra Leone, Guinea and Liberia. Teresa Jusu has traded here all her life.
Like for ya, the Guineans they can't see them beaucoup. But by this time, nothing.
It was here that Ebola crossed into Sierra Leone 2 years ago. The market was badly hit.
Like this table, so being one of Mama, they call her Rebecca from Pondu. Na Ebola killer. Like this table, yanda, we being one of Auntie back na being Fatmata. This table, instead na Ebola killer.
Soon after the start of the crisis, all public gatherings were banned. No schools, no nightclubs, no sports matches, no markets. Sierra Leone had been making steady economic progress since the end of the civil war in 2002. The Ebola crisis has set it back many years.
Even that said in a manage will be the money because we just come on inside war. This Ebola in Kanwa, it don't put beaucoup timp away. It don't make friends that will be in the sea and there. Who will they talk, who they play? We know they see that again. Some of who picking the will be non born. At this time, who for don't get the hope say they will can't begin the help we know they see that again.
2 years on, the Ebola crisis has been declared over, but the ban on Sunday markets is yet to be lifted.
If the seller begin to sell back on Sundays, we will be happy. Now, so we go be able for the get a 15 them for the feed we picking and we host them. The street used for big park, but for now, as soon as they see the street is empty, empty.
Well, still in Sierra Leone, 2 months after the virus arrived in Koindu, it reached the capital city, Freetown. Hundreds died in the overcrowded slums, but it could have been more.
Meet the unlikely heroes of the Ebola crisis.
No more Ebola, no more virus, no more disease.
The Tripoli Boys are a notorious gang of petty criminals in Freetown. They live here in Moa Wharf, one of Sierra Leone's most filthy and overcrowded slums. Ideal conditions for Ebola to spread. On the beach in this makeshift headquarters live around 30 gang members. Ruling the roost is their leader, who calls himself Colonel Gaddafi.
Most of all man no should also, all man are like so my mama don't die, so my papa don't die. So they take us in a Muna Gaddafi. No, now me for take care of the all.
When Ebola reached Moa Wharf, Gaddafi was one of the first to get sick. He was taken to hospital, and his right-hand man, known as 5-0, decided to act.
We didn't call me for Mama say, so somebody don't sick. So why is I come? I can meet up that problem there. So I can meet up the problem. The boys are now all be there at the room. We be there at this community. So we be go host to host. They tell people, they sensitize people how for comport, how for live. And how you feel so far, not feel anything, not afraid. You make sure say, oh, they go to the fire, you take to the hospital, and you see say come back.
Several thousand people had already died in Sierra Leone. But Moa Wharf, a slum where over 8,000 people live in less than 1 square kilometre, pulled together to avoid the worst. And the reputation of the Tripoli boys was transformed.
Tripoli, Tripoli boys. Yes. The community people, you used to look them as bad boys, you understand? So after Ebola, they changed completely. Over 2 months, they used to go from house to house, sensitizing people about Ebola, you understand? So doing all kind of mobilization. So to us, they have changed their life now.
After 28 days in hospital, Gaddafi recovered and returned home. But not all his boys were so lucky.
About 7 boys that I lost. Small about, 12 or 13 years.
And it's not just those who got sick who are suffering the effects of Ebola. During the crisis, the whole country was on lockdown, causing the economy to nosedive.
It's not the camp on all long council now, don't can see the Tripoli boys there. No action no day, because no job. So when money can, we just sit down our camp. We too help the government and the community leaders to work to fight against this Ebola in this community. Being have 0 Ebola in Moaf and the whole country, So we need jobs now, please.
Despite all this, Gaddafi is proud that his boys had the chance to prove themselves.
So me, them boys are the one of the biggest boys here. What we say they near me, now my life was proud for. But kick Ebola come out of this country. Una this Moaf, una the Tripoli.
And filmmaker Paul Miles made those films from Sierra Leone. Jackie.
Now, house prices have long been a measure of wealth for many, and surveys show that prices are still rising post-Brexit. But is it a short-term phenomenon? Consumer confidence has hit its lowest point in 3 years, and the predictions are suggesting a slowdown in growth, with the outlook described as unusually uncertain by the Nationwide. As Simeon Brown reports.
When buying a house, everyone has a long list of what they want. What exactly are you looking for in a property?
Well, we're looking for a 3-bed, somewhere where we can park a car, so like a off-street parking, good school catchment area.
Come through, Mr. Lee.
Mr. Lee is a family man and a first-time buyer. The asking price for the house he has come to see has been reduced.
Before Brexit, we'd have open day viewings and people would offer asking price or above. Now, people like Mr. Lee have got an opportunity to come into the property and take their time before they make an offer.
People are more willing to negotiate on price, whereas before we had a look just before Christmas, and unless you was going to offer the asking price, no one really was looking to negotiate.
Ahead of June's referendum, the then Chancellor warned that voting to leave the European Union could hit the value of your home. So what is actually happening? Well, house prices on average are still going up. What is slowing down is the rate at which they increase. Last year, the average price rise was 6%. This year, that price rise was 5.7%. And it's forecast to be even lower at just 2.2% next year. But is expected to rise again to 4% in 2018. In the short term, the housing market does appear to be slowing down. But can any of this really be attributed to Brexit?
From our own data, we saw that price growth started to slow down at the start of last year, and that was really as a result due to the increase in stamp duty, and that change in stamp duty was really putting the brakes on the market a little bit, certainly the top end where the increases were felt the greatest.
The 3% rise in stamp duty for second home buyers was seen as a relief on the markets for new buyers. But according to Nationwide, house prices have still hit a record high average of £205,000. That's less than half the price for this house on the borders of northwest London.
At the moment it's on for 525, so if I could get it maybe just about 500.
If it's the right price for the buyer and the seller, then hopefully we can get a deal done, This is what we're here to do. Don't know about 500 though. It's a bit low.
Simeon Brown reporting there.
After the break, it was the biggest leak in history, over 11 million files from the offshore law firm Mossack Fonseca. But has the story gone away? We asked the 2 journalists behind the scoop, Can some of the world's most powerful people expect more revelations about their secret offshore accounts?
Welcome back. They claim they were invited to attend health and safety meetings. When workers at the Byron Burger chain from across London turned up, they say they were confronted by immigration officers eager to check their credentials. The Home Office denies that claim, but 35 people were arrested and some have already been deported. Byron has come in for heavy criticism online, but says it is fully compliant with immigration and asylum law. Jane Death has this.
Byron have been on the scene since 2007. You could say they sell boutique burgers. One George Osborne famously tweeted a picture of himself eating one of their gourmet burgers while working late on a spending review. But there are calls to boycott this burger joint after immigration raids at Byron branches around London. This photo shows officers inside one restaurant. 35 illegal workers were arrested. Some have already been deported. Workers say they were asked to attend morning sessions on health and safety that had been set up as a trap.
We've spoken to a legal Byron worker who was there during one of the raids. He didn't want to be filmed, but he did agree to speak to us on the phone.
It was a meeting for kitchen staff, matters of health and safety. 15 or 20 minutes later, immigration police arrived. The people they took away were the people whose names were on their list. The rest of the workers feel a little like we've been deceived by Byron. We feel betrayed and indignant.
The Home Office has confirmed the raids were carried out with the full cooperation of Byron, but dismissed the idea anyone was tricked into being arrested. There is now a boycott Byron movement from people who say they'll never eat there again.
The feeling driving the boycott campaign seems to be that somehow these workers were lured to their fate and served up on a plate to immigration officials. But just as many people are saying, OK, so Byron cooperated in an investigation into illegal workers. Where's the problem?
One tweet asked, what kind of employer sets traps to deport its own employees? Another says, limited edition snake burger at Byron. But this man says he may make regular visits to Byron for doing what's right. And another questions boycotting a company for trading within the law. What do others think about Byron's role in the raids?
I can understand why people are boycotting, because it's like people have been blindsided.
Acting in that way was underhand on the part of the business.
If that's actually what happened, then I think it's totally wrong.
No one from Byron would talk, but it did say,
the Home Office recognises that Byron as an employer is fully compliant with immigration and asylum law in its employment practices, and that Byron had carried out the correct right-to-work checks on staff members, but had been shown false or counterfeit documentation. We have cooperated fully and acted upon the Home Office's requests throughout the course of the investigation leading to this action.
The Home Office says the chain won't be fined because it was duped by illegal workers. But the idea it helped get them arrested means some have lost their appetite for this restaurant.
Jane Death reporting. Now, terrorism, random killings, Brexit, toxic domestic politics here and in the US, migration. All are big stories with huge implications for all of us. But one that has perhaps slipped below the current radar is the global scandal of the Panama Papers. First published in April, the papers were a leak of over 11 million confidential documents from the files of the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. It's one of the world's biggest suppliers of secretive offshore companies. The papers revealed how the powerful and wealthy around the world hid money, dodged sanctions and evaded tax. Over 200,000 offshore companies were involved. More than half are registered in British tax havens, as well as in the United Kingdom. And the documents put the hidden financial dealings of 128 politicians and public officials into the public arena. Among them, David Cameron's late father. He was shown to have used the company to set up an investment fund. Associates of President Putin were linked to the scandal, and the Prime Minister of Iceland was forced to resign. The list was seemingly endless, but the story ran out of steam, or did it? I've been speaking to two of the journalists involved in the expose, Friedrich Obermeier and Bastian Obermeier from the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. Did you fish for it, or did it just appear?
I got a message late one night, and it was from somebody who called himself Mr. John Doe and offered vast amounts of data. And we said yes, so I did not fish for it. It just, you know, it just came to us like a fate in some way.
I mean, in the beginning it was like, for us, we couldn't really believe it because we saw that it was data from Mossack Fonseca, this Panamanian law firm. So for us it was, wow, there's the possibility to look behind a curtain.
Well, you undoubtedly toppled people. The Prime Minister of Iceland is obviously a very good example, but there were Kazakhs, there were other sorts of people, but enormous revelations were made about China and the Chinese establishment, about Russia, about Putin in particular, but it seems that most of them made no impact at all.
I think for me personally, it's already an impact to see that there's a discussion going on. Even in China, we hear that there was a discussion, because in China it was really strange to see that how the Chinese media reported about this. In the beginning, they reported about the Western politicians being named in the data, about the Prime Minister of Iceland, for example. And then, when after some days we started to publish our investigations regarding China, then the big censorship came in. But at that time, there was already a discussion going on in China, and people were already asking, well, if there are Western politicians in there, what's with our politician?
But isn't the real truth now, and haven't you revealed, that corporative life, corporation life, has taken over democracy, has completely dominated now great elements of governance around the world, and it's fixed, and they're in charge.
What we see in the Panama Papers is that there has a parallel world has been established where the powerful and the rich hide their money. They also avoid laws. They really can choose which laws they want to have applied on them. So if they don't like a law in Germany for their heirs, they go to Panama and make a foundation, and no problem, no taxes anymore.
But you see, what you did in from a British point of view is that you made it very clear to people that our colonial dependencies are tax havens, virtually all of them, and that an enormous amount of tax evasion and avoidance goes on in them, and nothing actually has been done to prevent that. It's almost as if we've agreed that's the way capitalism works.
For example, the British Virgin Islands have been the tax haven that appeared most in the Panama Papers, although they were named the Panama Papers.
Has been and still is.
And still is. And I think that's the duty of the politicians in the United Kingdom, to really, here is the power to change things.
I mean, German politicians are not blowing the whistle, and neither are British politicians. We may have left Europe, or we may be leaving Europe, but the fact is we're both bound by the same political classes who do not blow the whistle on the rich.
We should all be aware that this is a topic that touches everybody, one of us. Because if the riches evade taxes, it means that this is money that is missing for hospitals, for schools, for universities, for streets. And everybody should be aware of that when he speaks about tax haven. It's about speaking of everybody, one of us, in our everyday life.
Friedrich Obermeier, Bastian Obermeier, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.
Well, that's all we've time for tonight, but we'll be back tomorrow at 7.
You can see us on 4+1, but until tomorrow, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good evening.